Hello and welcome to Spoiled Games. As you may know, we're recording this during the summertime, so there isn't a ton of new games that are coming out, and we were going to take this opportunity to revisit some classic games, and this one is one of the biggest games of this generation, Uncharted 2 Among Thieves from Naughty Dog. Of course, they just recently put out the exceptional Last of Us. Once again, there's a reason why this show is called Spoiled Games. We are going to spoil the game. If you have not played Uncharted 2, shame on you. Also, go play it, come back, you'll appreciate this discussion all the more. But for the rest of you that have played, I think, one of the finest games of this generation, I'm now going to introduce our panel of Rev 3 Games. Max Scoville.
Great to be here, Adam.
Good. It's good to have you. And from Revision 3's audience development team, Nick Robinson.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Also, Nick is an avid gamer, not just someone who was in the building that we decided to drag up here. So I think one of the fun things is I fondly remember playing this the first time when it was about to come out. I reviewed it. I gave it the famous phrase, "This is the finest single-player game I have ever played."
So you said shame on you if you haven't played Uncharted 2. I'm one of those people. So
Well, but now you played it.
Yeah, I played it. I'm free of that guilt. There's just a bunch of other games I still haven't played that I have to get to. But I think 2009 was one of the years that I wasn't gaming at all. So it was just I played Uncharted 1 when it first came out, back when the PS3 was just the thing that one of my friends had that had really cool graphics. So we're like, oh, okay. And Uncharted 2, I was starting college or something, so I didn't get around to it. And then by the time I kind of came around and started, working in gaming and get back in the industry, it was like
there were new games coming out.
It was assumed that I'd played Uncharted 2, right. And I'd sort of just awkwardly be like, I wouldn't tell anybody because they would stare at me in disbelief and get angry that if I confessed that I hadn't played it, and I can see why, because it's a really good game.
So what were because you had obviously heard all the acclaim about Uncharted 2 prior to it, what were your expectations coming in, and how did they live up, surpass, or sometimes, underwhelm in that regard?
I remember not enjoying the shooting in Uncharted 1 that much. I wasn't much of a console shooter person at that point, and I remember the climbing being sort of cool, but like kind of, I don't know. I was like, it's sort of like Dude Raider, It's a man instead of a lady, and you're climbing things, and that's sort of it. And then I played the Vita Uncharted, which I was sort of underwhelmed by because it was underwhelming. And then I remember you mentioning a train, and when I got to the train in Uncharted 2, I was just dumbfounded because that is really quite impressive. I mean, the thing that I really love is just the amount of it's like Naughty Dog was like, okay, action movie, adventures, Let's do the most advanced version of Pitfall humanly possible, and they did, and it's just the level of detail in every level, all the washing machines, there are washing machines in the level, and they're just gorgeously rendered. There's no like, we need to get quick with the washing machines. Let's rush through this so that we can have the part where you shoot the guys. It's like every little part of it is just very carefully, so much attention to detail there, and then the actual shooting and running and jumping is entirely enjoyable too. So
yeah, one of the things that really struck me both times I played the game is that Amy Hennig's writing, and obviously Naughty Dog is now quite well known for their writing. It so informs the action. It is an Indiana Jones story. It's overtly derivative of Indiana Jones, though I think far better than the majority of the Indiana Jones movies that are out there. But that sense of kind of wonder and adventure that's in the story seems to be present in a lot of the action sequences where you almost feel like you're sort of in control of the narrative in that localized moment. I'm thinking, when you first get to the city up there in the Himalayas and it's kind of war-torn and you're in that kind of courtyard in front of the important building, there's so much room that you can move around in that every time I would even die, there was no need to even play it similar to how I tried it before.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Just the sense of space and the variety of locations, I think that's a big part of it. Is like when you're adventuring, it's like let's take them to places they haven't been before. And I loved the Nepalese village. I thought was brilliant. And what was it? There's the part sort of I guess the Nepalese kind of city where it's all everything's sort of war torn and there's a sort of revolution happening and you're climbing on street signs and all that.
Yes,
I love that. And the thing that I've actually, it's weird because I played Last of Us before playing this, and something that I loved in Last of Us that is present in this too is using yellow things as cues that you can climb shit, as opposed to being like, if you go near something, they're like, press up to jump on this thing, you can climb this, just press X. They're like, no, look for yellow stuff. It might be like a gutter or a sign or a parking meter or some weird painted overhang.
And what better way, this is a perfect segue, thank you so much, I mean, the opening, the tutorial level, from the middle of the game, but this absolutely awe-inspiring sequence where you're on the train, hanging off a cliff, and that's how they're going to teach you under the sense of duress, instead of that, that typical rudimentary, there's nothing interesting going on, here's how you jump. It's like, no, here's a crisis, you need to somehow do the absolute impossible.
It's incredible. Like, the yellow is perfect because it's in-game, right? Like, I remember playing Enslaved, which was very sort of pseudo-Uncharted in a lot of ways, and everything just sort of, like, flashes or blinks or shines when you're supposed to jump on it, and it completely pulls you out of it. This, like, it's yellow. It's not always the exact same yellow. It's not always yellow in the same way. But, yeah, like you were saying about the writing, there's something about it that is naturalistic in a way that I don't think games even today are doing. It's very like Nathan Drake just has this sort of almost flirty relationship with literally every other character in the game, where he's just like so playful and wisecracky and
and the language, the dialogue when it's delivered by Nolan North, it's so much of it is throwaway. If you look at so many other games that are out there, like it's almost as if every character is aware there's a camera nearby. They need to just suddenly just sort of, everything has to be extemporaneous and very important for the camera. And here it feels more natural than even, I think, an Indiana Jones movie, but still very, very similar to Harrison Ford's ability to just take the best line and just kind of toss it off into the distance.
It does a great job also of just sort of, you don't really know necessarily who's a new character and who's a character that's being introduced, in the sense that they're not doing exposition for that. They're sort of just like, people are going to show up and they're going to interact as though, they're old friends. Like, so for instance, Indiana Jones, when he, I don't know, meets, I forget which, any character, Marion or Marcus or whatever, there's this kind of camaraderie that exists there, and they very much got that down with Nathan, because he's just like interacting with people. At the very beginning, you're drinking beers, and it's like, oh hey, you want to do a heist? Do you want to steal a Turkish lamp or whatever? Like, and they're not trying to be like, here's a prologue sequence, let's introduce all the characters one by one. It's pretty much just throwing you into the action, which I find that quite refreshing, because...
And then it slows down. Then it has this more stealthy level that happens there in Istanbul, in the museum, and then it starts to set up the story about the betrayal, and that, his friends aren't exactly what they seem to be.
But I mean, especially with video games, in terms of storytelling, are pretty bad a lot of the time. They're really pretty awful.
I think we've all noticed that.
Yeah, that's correct. Starting a game in the middle to do the tutorial and being like, here's a crazy exciting thing that happened. How did you get here? Okay, you finished that. Now let's go to the part at the beginning where you're drinking beers and, explaining that there's going to be a heist thing, and then, then it leads you in, and then you don't come back to the train sequence until halfway through the game.
To the point where you've forgotten that there was this, kind of dire moment up there in the snow-capped Himalayas with the train leaning off.
Periodically remember, and you're like, ooh, that's going to be exciting. I can't wait to get to that part.
It's cool the way they do it the second time too, because it's from a completely different set of camera angles. So like, even though you're doing roughly the same exact platforming sequence, they do it in a way where like, just actually the entire way the camera works in that game. Like, they play with it in such cool ways. I remember the first time you encounter one of those sort of horned beasts, and like you're climbing up a wall that's very distant, and in the foreground you sort of see like a mouth, and then like it veers off into the shadows.
Oh my god, that was
like,
so good.
There's like 1,000 little moments too of just like, that is a really, like, actually the way the game opens, Nathan Drake is sitting on a train, and he just seems a little out of it and a little weird, and then slowly you realize that it's a train hanging off a cliff. Like, they do stuff from moment one that no one else is doing just with camera work.
Visual storytelling.
Yeah.
Well, also, Yetis are in the game.
Yetis.
I didn't know there were Yetis in the game. I was so excited when the Yetis came out.
Are you being serious?
I'm serious.
I think that is a point of question.
I'm not convinced there are Yetis.
Played the game.
Okay, so I mean, this is a spoiled game, so we can sort of just throw it out there. Yeah. I was sort of annoyed when I found out that the Yetis were Scooby-Doo villains.
Very messed up Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, villains. I mean, they were like Avatar super mutants in the Himalayas. But I mean, the fact that they were a bunch of dudes wearing masks kind of just... I was really excited. I was like, Yetis? Oh boy! I was really excited about Yetis, and then they were just like, oh, just kidding. They're guys.
It almost seemed to me like that was their way of being like, we're going to do a supernatural thing, but we're going to pare it back. Like, it's not Yeti supernatural. Like, I think the whole twist with the resin is extremely dumb, and this is their way of making it seem less dumb. Like, no, it's not Yeti dumb, it's resin dumb. But still, I think the first moment you see those like 4 blue Hulk guys who are like yelling like Arnold Schwarzenegger-y voices.
Why they did that? Why they scaled it back from Yeti Supernatural to Blue Man Group Supernatural? Because Yetis using crossbows would be dumber than having blue guys in the mountains huffing resin.
Yeah, well, only barely. I still, it's a game.
You can't have the Yetis being like jumping around and punching people, and then
Right.
suddenly new Yetis show up that have crossbows that kill people in one hit.
Yeah.
Because that would be.
Well,
That would be dumb.
it's also, and let's talk a little bit about the Yeti. In Uncharted 1, when I reviewed it, I think that this was shared by a lot of people, the introduction, if not the supernatural, then of the monster element that you get in the final third, really didn't, I feel, serve the gameplay all that well. You've really been conditioned to kind of read the environment in a particular way, and now you have something that's moving a lot faster with a much different set of AI, and you're having to undo everything that you've set up. I felt, and especially the second time I played it, that you can feel the limitations of the game mechanics in your first encounter with the Yeti. Because now I'm just running around. I'm not using my environment in a smart way. And it does seem to sort of, that they had to sort of force this direction of the story without really adapting the gameplay to kind of make it as invigorating as the rest of the game.
Yeah, I think straight up the blue dudes aren't fun to fight either.
No.
Like they're just not enjoyable, and I think that's why I'm sure if you counted, there's probably only maybe a dozen to 15 of those actual blue guys who you end up fighting, and it's
Yeah.
because they're just dudes who you have to shoot a lot.
Watch
of
out,
times.
they've got energy spheres. Don't let those things hit you.
No, and I really felt, and despite my high praise for the game, that last sequence, you're in Shambhala, and that promise of what it's supposed to be, given how the rest of the game looked, they almost kind of painted themselves into a corner. How can they actually? That's almost what a third game should be: is taking place in this mystical, wondrous land that's been part of lore for I don't know how many centuries.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is what I think kind of drew me in was all the stuff that's so familiar and the fact that it did keep one foot on the ground. Like I've been on a train, I've seen washing machines before. Like these are things that I recognize, and I'm like, oh, that's an incredible attention to detail in that thing that I've seen on a regular basis. Once you're in Shambhala, it kind of just turns into enslaved a little bit,
Yeah.
And you've got this, it's a little bit too out there.
I mean, I think all the setting stuff there is, it was too gorgeous for me to care. It's just so colorful and high contrast that the actual Shambhala environment I think is gorgeous, but I don't want to fight avatars in it.
God, that was
straight up.
it was weird. It kind of felt like in terms of the pacing, it felt a little bit National Lampoon's Vacation in the sense that you spend this entire game trying to get to this amazing place, and then you get there and it's just like, oh shit. And it's like you're there for like a very short time, and there's just a man who's like, I'm going to blow the place up. And you're like, well, better shoot these pods.
Yeah, and we'll get to the end with the final boss battle in a second, but going back to sort of the characters in the story, we have Elena, who is a holdover from the original Uncharted, and then there's Chloe, and I guess in terms of her fidelity to Drake, whether or not, I didn't feel as much of the tension the second time. I played it before, but my memory is of playing the first time, that, like an Indiana Jones movie, your gut's telling you this is probably going to work out for the best, at least for most of the characters.
Yeah, I think a lot of the double crossing you see from her is right there in the title of the game. It's called Among Thieves, as in honor among thieves, as in there isn't any. And that's sort of the most compelling, I think, interpersonal relationship, is like her relationship with Drake and what's the third?
We're going to call him British Gentleman.
Yeah, British Gentleman. Like that, the interplay between the three of them and the triple and quadruple crossing that seems to be going on there is just like, it's so fun. From the first time you see Chloe and she like sort of does that weird mounting him in the hotel and it's like, I'm on your side.
That was the thing is because I haven't played the first one, or at least not in ages. She was a new character, correct?
Yeah,
I think Chloe was brand
See,
new.
that's what I mean by introducing characters in a way that they're not like, here's my friend Chloe. It's sort of like she should. I mean, I guess they kind of introduce her, but
But it's not like, let's stop down, give some backstory.
Yeah.
It's like, it's something that isn't essential really to the appreciation of it.
No.
And yeah, you learn a bit more over time. They had a relationship
show,
before.
don't tell.
And all
Exactly.
yeah,
And
exactly.
they show that by the straddling in the bedroom.
It's a great, still, again, video games aren't the subtlest art form necessarily, but
Straddling
they show
is an
it.
excellent storytelling medium.
It
really.
means we've met.
Yeah.
Either recently or a long time ago. Now, it's with that in mind that you have kind of a familiar, I mean, really you could almost see it's like kind of its origins in screwball comedy, just kind of like this threesome, foursome, they don't know how to get along. But then you have Lazarevich, our bad guy, which is really interesting because especially, it invokes what happened in Yugoslavia back in the 90s. I mean, like, he's a war criminal. He does do some horrible things in the course of the game, but he also seems to represent a much nastier side that if you look at kind of the analogy to Indiana Jones, yes, it has Hitler, but it has cartoon Hitler. Mm-hmm. And here, this isn't cartoon Milosevic. This is something much closer to sort of the generals and the atrocities.
I'm surrounded by fools and traitors.
Yeah.
He just shoots one of them. You're like, all right.
I mean, did you feel that the two kind of worked? I mean, they do work, and sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit guilty for watching and playing this game and enjoying it.
I think that I thought he was a good villain for the most part. You know, the kind of trying to relate it to real life is, again, one of those issues. I'd say the biggest complaint I've ever heard about Uncharted is the fact that Nathan Drake is a rampant serial murderer.
Yeah.
Which is almost addressed at the very end in the boss
Yeah,
battle.
in like a throwaway line from Lazarevich, he's like, how many dudes have you killed today? I'm like, well, that doesn't explain away. Like, I checked my body count at the end. It was 914.
Yeah.
I shot 914 people this past week.
Human beings. Who's a war criminal now? But I think that I like the way in which they introduce him, in the sense that they sort of show him a little bit. There's no like preliminary boss fight with him, you know. You kind of
That's true.
It's kind of, and you play a good chunk of the game before you actually see him. You sort of hear about him, and then it's kind of you get kind of a distant glimpse of him. I wish that they'd done that more so and just had it kind of like there was some mystery surrounding him.
And there is that, like, his whole philosophy is just kind of will to power. You know, this quasi-fascist way of thinking that by eating the resin, that, you know, and that, you know, his evil is just sort of because he's a better man, he's all Ubermensch and everything like that. I see where that's going. I still struggle to sort of contrast that with Drake. Yes, he has killed a lot of people, but what is he supposed to represent? The guy who accidentally, as you pointed out, slaughters 1,000 people on his way for treasure and then to save the world. I've been trying to reconcile those two, and it is, I think, still the thing that plagues the Uncharted series, is that how deep do they want to go? Because Last of Us, I think, has that kind of discussable quality of character stuff that Uncharted
it's a
seems
direct
timid
response.
to want to go
Exactly.
there.
I think Last of Us is a direct response to that, because the first time you ever heard the ludonarrative dissonance thing, it was about Uncharted 2, the first time I heard it, and I think they almost do themselves a disservice by bringing up the fact that Nathan Drake has killed so many people. But as for Lazarevich, I mean, he's serviceable as a villain, I think. I think he is held back a little bit by the fact that he is in a game with a half dozen other characters who I think are some of my favorite video game characters ever. Like, we haven't mentioned Sully yet.
We haven't mentioned
the most likable
or
character.
Tenton, who is probably one of the
God,
most
Tenton's
impressive
awesome.
Such
characters.
a cool, like,
I mean, the idea that they would actually have a character that never speaks English, because in that regard, you feel so much closer to Drake, because you're as confused as the character is.
I just give them so much credit for that, because, again, not over-explaining things. There's a certain kind of ambiguity of, like, what the hell is this guy saying? And you feel like you're actually on Drake's side in the sense that you're like, what does he want me to do? He's not being like, hey, Drake, go up there and climb that rope. He's just like, then you're like,
the sequence
he just
still funny,
he
too.
just bounds away and
It's
climbs
funny,
something.
but
You're like,
it reminds us how we are so comfortable with the language of video games that we really don't need the video game to tell us what to do. It just needs to have that gesture, and that, as you said, like we're like, yo, we get it. We've been here many times before.
For the video game equivalent of an action blockbuster, I think Uncharted 2 does a great job every step of the way of pretty much treating you like an adult. Like, you never hear him come out and say that him and Elena like are interested in each other. That's a subtly communicated thing for a video game. The sequence without dialogue, like there's a trillion examples. I
I
think
would have loved it if there's a part where Drake just looks at the camera and goes, "We had sex."
I mean, they basically do that with Chloe, right? They almost have that.
Yeah.
But
one would think, yet again, yes, they've known each other.
perhaps,
before.
yeah.
Now, sort of other than the characters in Uncharted 2, what really stood out to me is the first time I played it was kind of the character of the tone in the action sequences, especially those kind of absolutely amazing set pieces with the collapsing building, and obviously on the train. I mean, I don't think I've ever played anything that fed my 10-year-old desire to live the life of Indiana Jones, and I've still struggled a little bit to put my finger on what they're doing that cannot seem to be accomplished by any other game of its time.
You know what I think it is, and this I can't explain the technical side of it, but it seems to me what they do is in every video game there's a line between the stuff you can play and the stuff you have to watch in a cutscene, and I think Uncharted 2, more than any other game I've ever played, was able to push that line up so that stuff that would normally be relegated to a cutscene, a collapsing building, jumping out of a building into another building's window, like you get to do those moments.
No, and it's actually, if you go into the cutscenes that we were just talking about, those are the character moments, the things that you really can't seem to pull off with a controller, that you have to give over that control. Technically, it's
also
amazing.
no loading screens. There's
Yeah.
no load times, which is brilliant.
That's a tradition of Naughty Dog going back to the Jack and Daxter.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
it'd be cool if other studios did that too.
Yeah, how they, I mean, in terms of some of the technical marvel with those set pieces is there's independent physics of Drake on top of independent physics, collapsing building, moving train. A scene that isn't always everybody's standout, but I would love to chat about it for a second, is when you're doing the Jeep chases.
Yeah.
First time I played it, that was the one time I kept on dying and dying and dying and dying. Because it didn't occur to me that I can jump from Jeep to Jeep, which is what I've always wanted to do in a game.
Yeah.
But how many times is it procedural? You kill 5 guys, you get the quick time event, and then you jump over to the next one. And suddenly it occurred to me, it's like, no, I can do it. And that's your point, Nick, that suddenly I'm getting to do all those things that I'm always being held back from in so many other games out there.
And it works.
What I think is really worth noting about Uncharted, and to another effect, The Last of Us, is that people get through that thing where they're like, it's still a guy, still a white guy with some scruff who's shooting people with guns, and it's like, yeah, but you got to realize they're taking things that have been part of our adventure
vernacular.
Yeah. And they're recreating them. Like doing a train sequence or a Jeep chase in a movie is impressive. Recreating that when you are actually playing as the person doing it and making it enjoyable to experience yourself that's impressive, and they should be applauded for that. And it's taking something that is kind of tried and true. Train sequences, that's been a thing in action culture going back to the dawn of cinema, pretty much.
Yeah.
One of the first things was, oh, it's a train, that's exciting, look at it, it's moving.
the Great Train Robbery. Yeah, it's the Lumiere brothers.
Yeah.
The very first,
and they're like, let's do that and do that well using this medium. And I feel like so frequently video games are trying to almost over innovate, and that they're like, that thing that Hollywood does is cliched, like we don't want to go near that. But Naughty Dog is sort of paying an appropriate homage to this kind of culture that has. And
it points out that when you see these movies, and I say this more like think about my young self, that I began to you see such wonderful lives and exciting lives being lived out there on the screen, which does in some ways sort of highlight how lacking yours is of that level of adventure, beautiful women, and all that. And here's the game that really fulfills the promise of what games can do, which is to cross that line and give you sort of a sense of that thrill, that adventure that you're used to just sort of seeing happen up there, passively up there on the screen.
It's escapism. It's fantasy. It's adventure.
And I think it helps a lot
and glory.
That the character of Nathan Drake is just as taken aback by everything that's happening as you are. Like, there's so many little oh no, oh no, oh no, like, oh my god. Like, there's like 3 or 4 times where he barely escapes the situation and just laughs about it because that's all he can do. And that's that's how I react to a really good scene in an action movie. I don't know about you, but when something absurd happens and they stick the landing and it's just like, it feels like you just scraped by, that's the natural reaction to have. What I heard was that they had North play through a pretty nearly done version of Uncharted 2 and sort of recorded his reactions and had him react the way Drake
and that's why
would.
It sounds like you or I actually playing the game there.
My friend was watching me play it, and she said, oh no, 3 or 4 times, or maybe twice, at the exact same time that Nolan North did in-game, because those are the natural times you'd say it. Like, it just lined up perfectly.
So the collapsing building sequence and the train sequence, they're very, very long. And I think that's another thing we haven't touched on, which is the pacing. They know how far to go, and they know exactly when to stop, but they went much longer. It's a technical accomplishment that, you have the collapsing building, but then you have everything that leads up finally to taking out the helicopter at the top of the building. The train sequence, you're going from mid-level mountains all the way to the snow-capped Himalayas, and there's never that sense of, okay, can we finish up now and get to something else? It just stays really invigorating, and that is an amazing thing.
I think me neither. And I think with the train sequence, how they accomplish that is, that would be a fine sequence to just be good looking but very linear. But in reality, there's 3 or 4 different ways to play that. You can try and stealth it almost. You can climb along the sides and yank people out of windows. You can just go guns blazing. It's not only good looking, it actually opens up new weird gameplay possibilities. It's not only a great looking train sequence, it's the best possible playing version of that sequence.
And it gives you, in a sense, as you said, ownership. You're writing the action. It is not sort of predicated by this is the way that you have to play it. You're on the train, and you can be inside the train, on top of the train, and mixture of both. You're still kind of telling the story through the way that you're playing it.
It extends to little things too, like ladders. You can climb up a ladder, or you can jump up a ladder.
I jump all the ladders.
Yeah, and it sounds like a small, stupid thing, but every little platforming sequence, there are 2 or 3 ways to make it your own, and not just be like, well, I might as well be watching a video of this and holding a stick. That's a big feat, I think.
I do love there's a the kind of self-induced ludonarrative dissonance that makes it one of the funniest things, and I love this in all games. There's a part where it was like, I think when you're helping that girl through the area, or the dude who got shot or whatever, the cameraman.
Right, the cameraman.
You're limping through the kind of war zone, and you get to a part, and it's like, I think we're safe here. And there's this room where there's all these pots and jars and cans and boxes and things everywhere. And I decided to just attack everything in the room. So they're like, let's rest here. I think we're safe for a moment. And I'm like, no, you're not. I'm just running around and throwing grenades and kicking people. And it's just, and everything was falling off the shelves. And that was amusing for me. Also, every time I was with somebody else, and it's like, let's go up here, Drake. And they're just like climbing up the ladders. I just like do this sort of butterfly stroke up the ladders, just leaping completely. And it's that takes me out, but in a way that I find very amusing.
Because at the end of the day, the game is yours. I think that's all the time we have now for Uncharted 2. I would like to thank you very much, Nick Robinson, Max Scoville.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to do this
Great
again.
to be here, Adam.
Thank you so much, Matt. We're going to do this again with other older games. Keep an eye out for Shadow of the Colossus. It is the PS2. I think it's beyond a cult hit, but let's go ahead and call it a cult hit because we use that word without really knowing what it means. Please note, there are far more spoiled games out there, including Naughty Dog's recent masterpiece, The Last of Us. We hope to see you again.